James, you look so different. James, what happened?
We need to find this place or we'll be late.
Make a left on Astrology Avenue. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant right. It should be right here at 444 Spirit Way. Oh, turn!
It looks like Renee. Yay, we're on time.
The James and Kellee Show.
Great, let's start the show.
Well, and today we're going to talk about trauma, and particularly the vortex of trauma. Can you explain what that is to everybody?
Yeah. Well, as much as, of course, I believe in our spiritual selves, what James, first thing James taught me was, what does he say always? That we're souls having a human experience.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So we are still having a human experience, and on Earth, we can, experience traumas. And we used to think traumas were like big deal traumas, which in my field we call the big T traumas, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, rape, the things that everybody would never disagree. That's traumatic. But there are also small T traumas, which are little things that happen just over and over and over again.
Like,
which
give me
can
an
also
example
be-
of that, like a small T trauma.
It's like, for example, as every mammal attaches to the person that they're mostly around, So by 18 months, you know who the baby is primarily attached to, because it's the person that they look for. It's the person that they get calmed by immediately, like a dog. A dog can wag its tail and be, love to be petted by a whole bunch of different people. But once their owner shows up, it goes crazy. I mean, you have 2 dogs. So it's because your dogs are attached to you primarily. Everybody else is great and fine, but the primary attachment, and depending on how attuned that person, and there's secondary attachments that are just as important in a person's life as well, but how attuned that person was to our needs, sets the stage. And those can be like the little traumas. A baby's crying and the mother or the caretaker, it's not always the mom, doesn't go to it right away. That's a misattunement, so many of these throughout the years can also cause trauma and can cause us to all of a sudden have anxiety as adults, or not trust people, or kind of
by the mother or the primary attachment person.
By the primary attachment, and this is
didn't
not
attune.
That wasn't attuned to what a child needs. Many times a doctor will, misadvise. They still believe that sleep training a baby is a good idea. In other words, you leave the baby to cry it out at night so they can learn how to self-soothe. Well, the myelination in the brain doesn't exist for a baby to learn how to self-soothe. Babies learn how to soothe themselves by the way we soothe them. That's how they learn.
Yeah.
So there's still, unfortunately, a lot of misinformation. And so it's not, and I'll repeat this through the whole thing. It's not about blame. It's about understanding. Because as an adult now, I can understand what happened. Why I think a certain way, why some things are, where my trauma and percentage of trauma is. There's no point in blaming. They did the best they could, but it's so I can understand it. And so then, and at this point, the ship's already sailed. What didn't happen for me or to me when I was a kid, I can't get from somebody else. I can only get from myself. And that's where, when you go and see a therapist, you heal those wounds. So you do have more of a strong sense of self. So then you can confront the world.
Ah, absolutely. Yeah. What is a trauma vortex? Can you explain
the trauma vortex? Yeah, it's just kind of a term that we use to say when we're in, like when we get triggered, we go immediately into that trauma vortex. So whatever.
Is that like a black hole?
Kind of. It kind of feels like a black hole. What happens from a psychological standpoint, it causes people literally to regress back into childhood. And so we're actually responding as if we're there. We don't feel like we're a kid, so it's not, a conscious regression. But when we get triggered, we will react, and you see people, many times you see people reacting kind of in childlike behaviors, even road rage.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Wendy Connolly makes a comment, and it's a good comment. She says, we're all traumatized by this pandemic. And interesting enough, Wendy, that's one of the reasons Shirley's here is because we're going to be doing an event on February 12th with James Van Prague and a wonderful woman who's a sound healer named Geraldine Glass. And we're going to be talking about the effects of being traumatized, actually,
With COVID.
by
Mhm.
COVID. Whether you've been isolated, whether you've had loss of it, whether you've had it, whatever it is. And this is not a political statement at all. It's just observing what we've gone through in the last couple of years. And we've kept the price point really low so people can join us. And it's
Yeah.
really about healing. And Shirley's going to give tools on healing this the trauma, the depression, the anxiety. And I'm going to be
Yeah.
talking. James and I are going to be talking about it from a spiritual standpoint of what the opportunities are for growth during that we've had.
Yeah.
And Geraldine is going to be doing this unbelievable 30-minute sound bath. So please join us
Those are
if you
so
can. It's the
healing.
day before the Super Bowl, but if you can join us, that would just be great. And then James is going to do an incredible meditation. So
Yeah.
it's going to
Yeah.
be really quite a big
It,
event.
I mean, we're all going through COVID fatigue.
COVID fatigue, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, Shirley, is that the
You know,
truth? Is that
and
the truth?
yeah. So it's trauma on top of whatever trauma is unresolved in us. If we look at trauma is basically when the nervous system gets over. I mean, the brain's biggest job is to survive, is to stay alive. That's how the
Oh,
species, you know, stayed alive through all these years.
mhm.
So that's the most important part, job of the brain. And so if we start from there and we look at anything that feels threatening, that feels unsafe, and a child needs to feel safe. You
Yeah,
know, they
yeah.
they say don't spoil the child. There's no such thing the first year. A child needs to feel held and touched. And, you know, a baby, the baby only knows it exists by the mother looking in his eyes and mirroring his existence to him,
Mm.
or to her. The mother smiles and the baby smiles back because the message to the baby is it's a good thing that you exist.
Oh my
So kids
gosh.
that came from neglect didn't get that.
Right. Jennifer Pedke asked, do people get stunted in maturity from that age of when trauma occurs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Particularly if it's a big shock trauma or like the age where people started to use drugs.
Yeah,
Say it's 15 or 16, and then as an adult you kind of see that their emotional development got stunted right there. So yeah.
right. Right. Oh my gosh. Well, tell us about like what with the work with Dr. Levine, what what do they talk about with trauma, with trying to uh, heal trauma, trying to
Yeah.
get out of the stop the vortex?
Well, let me just say, I am like
Yeah,
a starstruck little girl when I'm
she
around
really
Peter.
is. I am not kidding you. You just say the name Peter Levine and
Oh my
it's
God.
all
I'm like,
done.
oh,
No, it's true.
because he came up, I mean, he just studied this for years and he came up with somatic experiencing. Now, he's not the first one to come up with the type of therapy that uses the body to release trauma. But what he wondered about years ago was why animals in the wild didn't get traumatized. So you see an antelope that almost gets caught and somehow gets away. And then when you watch it back with the herd, it's hanging out fine. And he's like, we share that same part of the brain. Why do we get traumatized and animals don't? So he started to observe them. And right after an almost attack, if they go safe, once they're safe, he noticed that the muscles kind of, or they kind of shake, and that's completing, getting rid of that fight or flight energy. That anytime we're in danger or we perceive danger, the primitive part of the brain immediately goes into fight or flight. And if we can't fight back or run away, we'll go into freeze. So everything is turned on inside, but we look like we're the calmest person on earth.
Okay, so this is really interesting because Bella makes a good point here. She says that's the book is called Waking the Tiger by Peter
Mhm.
Levine. So again, here's that reference to tiger.
Yeah,
Okay, so this is a month where and a year where we all become we all wake up on some level
yeah,
with this.
yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, I even forgot about that reference. He's always called, that tiger is that life force in us, you
now,
know?
yeah, this is an interesting question. Ruth Suarez says, "Hello, Kelly and Shirley. Can trauma also be things you did not get, like being the love that your soul needed? I often hear they loved you their way." Good point.
Well, that's the attunement piece.
Okay.
As a parent, if you want to be the best parent, and my book shows, how I learned along the way. And when I started to learn about, about the brain and the body and everything, all the mistakes I did. So please try not to feel terrible and know that you just did the best that you could. But yeah, that's the attunement piece. So it's important to get to know your kids, get to know your babies. You might have, the temperament is something we are born with. So, those kids that, are slow to warm up and need to take time and look, observe, and those kids that just jump right in, that's temperament. So it's important for a parent to attune to that and to know what the child needs and to try and help guide them that way. But when I come from neglect. And so there was nothing. There was no attunement. There was no interaction. So you grow up with a sense of, I don't deserve to exist, because that existence piece
Did you feel that you were not part of the herd? Because I know there's something about that being part of the so you're not alone. You're that you don't belong in the world.
That's an evolutionary piece, because the nervous system is programmed to connect with people, because the more connected we are, the more high chance of survival. Because if I'm alone in the woods, I can't see the tiger approaching me behind, but you can. So our nervous system was kind of built to be in connection with people. Kids that come from neglect don't feel like they belong, or don't feel like people want them there. I remember I used to get invited to parties and then not go, because I assumed, they don't really want me there.
And then did that play out in your life, your entire life, until such a time that you worked on it?
Yeah, I know you're very kindly asking me that question as if you don't know.
No, I know the answer. I'm just, I want other people to understand it.
Yeah.
Well, I know the answer.
Because, and Peter once told me, neglect sometimes can have worse effect on the psyche, because of that need to connect, there was no one there. So with physical, sexual abuse, that kind of thing, although it's horrific, it's someone doing something to you. So you must exist if someone is doing something to you. With neglect, you don't really know that you exist. So you're kind of floating in a way. And you taught me about, coming into the body. So which is why, not surprisingly, I found somatic experiencing, because I wasn't connected with my body. And so things, I believe the universe kind of presents things. It throws things your way, free choices, whether you listen to or not. But when I started that training, it changed my life.
Wow.
And how I practice. I mean, it's because what happens is, just to finish the thought, is that fight or flight, when something happens and we can't complete that, it gets stuck. That energy of the fight or flight or freeze response doesn't just disappear because the event is over.
Right.
And so many times anxiety is a fear because you didn't get a chance to do something about it. And so in session, when we talk about, sometimes somebody will be telling me about a trauma, and I'll notice their arm go up very subtly. I'm exaggerating. And that could be this arm wanting to protect, and it didn't get a chance to. So in somatic work, I'll notice, and I'll invite the person's attention to the arm and say, does your arm feel like doing something? Is there an impulse, an urge? Sometimes they'll do this. And so we do the movement very slowly. And then at times they'll notice tingling all the way down their arm. That's the nervous system releasing that fight response that got stuck. And that's truly how you heal trauma. We can understand what happened to us, but until we work with the body to help release the trauma, it in my opinion, doesn't get fully healed.
Wow. So listen to this. April Fox Billmeyer says, I had a bipolar mom and I'm 63. So I'm assuming your mother was not medicated, trying to get over the mental abuse she shared with me.
Yeah. It's sometimes it's just someone sharing that pain and someone holding the space for them to have those feelings. Yeah. Many times, especially as kids, you can't feel. You have to shut it down. So the work can be helping the person first notice what they're feeling, acknowledge, put words to what they're feeling, and then many times just sit there with them while they're having those feelings that were shut down so long ago.
So Bella asks, how do you get out of that cycle of it? I think she means chronic PTSD. And again, that would be this trauma vortex. So what's the first step, Shirley, of getting out of this? As soon as you come to this planet, you're going to have traumas. I mean, there are going to
Yeah.
be traumas, but some
Yeah.
really hold us back. So,
Mhm.
what is the best way to begin this process?
Well, certainly, I mean, the best way is always
Or
working with,
complex PTSD?
yeah, working with an astute therapist that knows how to work with that. But, you know, part of it is the balance, especially when we come from a childhood that was very chaotic or, you know, or traumatic. We hyper focus on the negative stuff, and we know the negative stuff, and the brain has a negativity bias, which is a evolutionary survival piece, because I had to remember the negative stuff, like where my buddy got killed, because that way I can avoid that so I don't get killed. The good stuff, who cares? You know, and so it's such an important piece to balance the brain out. So what I would say, the first step is start to notice things that make you feel good, that bring a smile to your face, that calm you down, and notice how the body feels, even if it's little things, and even if it lasts just for a second, like your favorite song comes on, or you know, whatever it may be. I have flowers, like I see the flowers behind you, Cal. I love flowers. Or when I get home, I turn on candles because I love that. And so you notice it, and then notice if your body kind of relax. And notice that every time you notice that, anything different from trauma or PTSD, you're stimulating other parts of your brain. And we can rewire the brain. This idea that you can't teach an old dog a new trick is not true. From a brain perspective, we can rewire, you know, the brain.
Well, that gives a lot of hope to people.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the first piece that I would is start to notice things that are opposite of fear, trauma, and chaos. Again, even if they only last for a moment, in that moment when you notice it and you take it to the body, you start to stimulate other parts of your brain.
Sounds so simple.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a start. It doesn't
It's
mean
a
you're not
great,
going to
no,
get
it's a
triggered,
great
and it doesn't
start.
mean you're not going to, yeah.
Shirley, this is a great question from Jacqueline Rink. How do you release trauma? So, can you describe it from a body's perspective? What some of those things, one of those actions are for a body when it
Yeah.
releases trauma?
Well, when you know, it's again, it's completing that fight or flight or freeze. So, you know, as I said before, so as an example, I was working with this gentleman who had witnessed, anytime you're either in or you witness a life-threatening, you know, accident or something, that can cause PTSD in yourself. So he had witnessed an accident that was just horrific, where, you know, people didn't make it, and he started to feel like he couldn't drive. And so in my work, you ask them to talk, you know, you take kind of frame by frame, scene by scene, and you notice if there's any activation in the body. And he was telling me the story, and parts of it were horrific. And I would stop him, and I would pause, and I go, "What are you noticing in your body as you're saying that?" He's like, "Nothing." And so he kept going. So of course, that's what told me, is that the emotions of what happened got fragmented and lodged in an unconscious, you know, in a place where he couldn't readily get. But the story he remembered. Sometimes we won't remember the story, but we'll remember a feeling. So it depends on how. And so he's telling me, and then I learned that you have, you know, you move your head from side to side. Just sometimes that might bring it up. So I asked, so once he was done and he was feeling nothing, I asked, move your head to the right slowly. And he did that, nothing. So then we did, move your head to the left. And he did this because the accident happened there. So when I was able to have his body do exactly what it was, since he was already talking about the accident, that's where the activation was, and that's where we can work. Wow. And so sometimes it's working. If you could have, if anything were possible, how would you have protected yourself, or what would you have wanted to do? So even when they come up with these stories that have, you know, a spaceship comes and takes me, it doesn't matter. The body still responds, because the body is able to fight back or run away.
I mean, using your imagination.
Using your imagination. That's where imagination, the primitive part of the brain doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. So that's why imagination is so powerful, because when you imagine something, the brain and body truly feels that you're there. So you can go from feeling as scared as, you know, as anything, and then imagine a safe place in your mind, and you'll notice your body completely start to relax.
And what are some of the actual physical feelings of when you do release it? Like, as I recall, it was like you could feel cold water almost coming out of your veins. You can.
Sometimes, right. Sometimes it's it's a sense of cold, and that's like letting go of the freeze response many times, coming down your legs or your arms. Sometimes the legs start moving and it's because they want to run. And so you mimic the running, and that allows that flight to come through. Dancing is one of your listeners just said, because that moves the body. Part of what's going on with COVID is because we're alone and there's not much to do. People are watching TV a lot, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that, but the body's not moving. And so the body can start to feel more fear. So moving is huge. Dancing, that can regulate the nervous system. Yawning. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When I'm working with someone, all of a sudden their stomach gurgles. That tells me that,
energy is moving.
That energy is moving, because what happens is that when you're afraid, the blood goes and stays more in the, in the big muscles to prepare for fighting or running. And so you start to get digestive issues because you're not digesting, because who cares about digesting the sandwich that I just ate if I have to run for my life? So when people start to calm, then digestion starts and you hear the gurgling.
Wow.
Or belching or yawning.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Hildy Martinez says, how about intergenerational trauma?
Yeah.
And that's really, we always have Carrie Gonia that we go to with that, which is family constellation therapy, because they believe that you carry 13 generations behind and 13 going forward. And she's an incredible family constellation therapist, and they do work with the intergenerational, because it does go to the next generation and the next generation.
Oh, so much research is showing up that shows that there's, intergenerational trauma is very, very real. And so maybe, Renee, if you can put up Carrie's information, because that's life-changing. I had a couple of years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago now, I had 2 clients completely separate, not related to each other. One in the morning, out of the blue, go, hey, do you know anything about family constellation therapy? And I went, no, tell me about it. So she told me about it. She works with someone in Canada. The afternoon, same question I get asked. And I'm like, okay, I have to pay attention. And she worked with Carrie, who used to be local here. And you can do it virtually, so you don't have to be in person. And so then I thought, okay, universe is telling me I have to pay attention. So I went and did an appointment with her, and it was life-changing. And
me too.
And almost everybody.
She's amazing. She's truly amazing. Julie Munsterman says, can you discuss suppressed memories and dreams?
Yeah, well, suppressed just means that you're not fully conscious of them, but they're still there. Just like old trauma, you may not be aware of it because it's repressed or suppressed, but it's still there. And so part of it again is having someone to help guide you through it. They'll know what question to ask. They'll know by your body language what to do. How, when I'm working with someone, their body is guiding me.
Right.
So we can go to places that are completely unplanned. Not that I plan, sessions, but their body is guiding me. And so it's important to, with memory, sometimes a color. If you were hit in a blue room when your mom was making coffee, you may not remember that, but coffee causes you to, the smell of coffee causes you to feel anxious. Or you walk into a room and it's blue, and all of a sudden you notice your heart's beating a little fast, and you may not know why. And so in session, we would, if you came in and told me that, we would say, okay, imagine that you're in a blue room, and let's start to notice what happens. And then we just observe the heart beating fast. And so often, if not almost every time, they're just observing whatever sensation showed up, and up pops a memory from the childhood. And I get so many times going, I haven't remembered that in years.
The trauma is fully healed? Great question. Or is it a continuous learning process?
Well, Elizabeth, I'm glad you're asking that question, because I asked Peter the same thing. I said, do you ever fully heal your trauma? And he looked away and was so thoughtful in his response, and then looked at me and said, he goes, we may not be able to fully heal it, but we can get it to the point where we can live, where it doesn't stop us from reaching our goals, from getting into a relationship, if that's what we want, from living.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sarah Turner says, how do you locate someone who uses these practices? Actually, we have the answer. It's healingtrauma.org. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a somatic experiencing website, because there are practitioners all over the world. So in there, you can put in your zip code and you can see if there's a practitioner in your area.
I believe it's healingtrauma.org, right? Or is it trauma healing?
Healing.org? Did they change that?
Renee, can you check on that? I can't remember if it's traumahealing.org. I think it's traumahealing.org. Yeah.
We'll check and see. I usually just put in somatic experiencing in the, and then, you know, of course, everyone that's trained doesn't always make them good. So I would call people and get, you know, and interview them over the phone and see what feeling you get.
Take care, everybody. Good night. Thanks,
Good
Shirley.
night. Oh, you're so welcome. Love you. Good night.
Love you too.
You've been listening to Both Sides Now and Beyond, featuring spiritual medium and master teacher James Van Praagh and spiritual medium and psychotherapist Kellee White.
That was great. Maybe we changed some lives.
And maybe opened up some minds.
Which way do I turn?
Right. I mean left.
The James and Kellee Show.